Okay, so welcome to This Is How I Teach vlog with myself, Breffni Conaty, and today I'm joined by Philip Curry. Phil, how are you?
Good, Breffni, good.
Very good. So anybody who doesn't or isn't aware of Philip yet, Philip's a teacher of business for about 27 years now, has written many articles for the Sunday Business Post, Evening Herald, books, given plenty of presentations that are revision seminars, is an examiner with the SEC as well. Phil, you're a bundle of experience. I don't think I've left that.
That means old, Breffni, is the word there for a bundle of experience, you know.
I think another guy, Michael Gallagher, who I had on here, kind of said the same thing. Be careful not to make me sound too old. But it's certainly no. I appreciate you coming on to do a vlog with me. I know I'd asked you a while ago, and we bounced around a few different ideas as to what we might do for the vlog, and I suppose I ended up putting it out to a few people on Twitter if they had any questions that they might like to ask you, and I got some good responses in from that. But we wanted then to tie it into a theme, and the theme, I suppose, was going to orientate around those questions, and it ended up just being a case of it's just knowledge that people wanted off you, tips and strategies for how to teach business, and I guess that's what we're going to try and do here if we can.
No problem.
Now this has coincided nicely, and I'm going to give credit where credit is due here. Now this wasn't Phil's asking, but when I put together what I wanted to do, Phil mentioned that he has a new book which is coming out now called The Higher Option. You can see it on the screen, and he kind of gave me a copy of it to see if this might be of help to help guide this conversation on this blog. And I actually asked Phil if he wouldn't mind if we went through bits and pieces of this. So anybody who's going to be watching this, you're actually going to be seeing a copy of his book before it actually goes out. I'll give you a proper and an official plug a little bit later on, Philip. But
okay.
I suppose I think what people would get most out of this, I wanted to ask you about strategies for teaching the subject and things that will come in the Q&A. Yeah. But you've quite a lot of this in this book already. I suppose if I start flicking through it, maybe you could stop me at some of the things that you feel are most important and stuff that teachers and students should be aware of when they are studying the Leaving Cert Business book.
Yeah, okay.
You tell me now where to stop. Okay,
stop at the first thing there. You can scroll back down again. So, I mean, anyone who's attended the seminars, and there's been quite a few people in the last, not so much last year, with this year with COVID, but the very first thing I always will do with the seminars is an exam plan, right? And as a corrector, I would look upon this as almost like a psychological reason to get the students, to get the corrector on side. And like, I think it only happened to me once in about maybe 20 years of correcting, only once ever did I get a batch of brilliant papers and they had this exam plan, which was clearly drilled into them, right, by a very enthusiastic teacher. But I mean, like, what it means is, if you see someone who's going to have written on the very first page, exam plan, exam starts 9:30, read the paper and do all the short answer questions, ABQ, and it's all timed out, and then you get 12:20, final sweep of the paper, you will not get a sob story, right, where someone's going to come along to you. I think I said in the YouTube broadcast early in the year, but like, people do not run out of time. They run out of knowledge, okay? But they pretend they run out of time, and we've all done it, okay? We've all been that soldier, sorry, ran out of time. Okay, you didn't. You kind of wrote for an hour on a 20-mark question and you wrote nothing on a 60-mark question because you didn't know it. So I think it's as much like, and despite the fact I would say I've spoken to probably, hundreds of students, if not thousands of students in the last 5 years, and I have not seen this exam plan been replicated, despite the fact that I said to people, look, use the exam plan, it's going to manage your time, etc., and it's going to make you look good. Okay, that's the first piece there. That's just a nothing piece, but it's something at the same time. So you scroll down there.
Can I ask you on this, and this is why I wanted to go through the book. And again, I know you were saying maybe don't look too like a plug, but when it comes to something like this exam plan, where you have your longer questions, first, second, third, fourth, would you give students any advice on how to approach those? Something that I use, and I don't mind saying this, and tell me if I'm wrong. I would say to a student who has their timing down to a T, when it comes to those longer questions, I would say to them, hit them hard with your best question first. Follow it up with your next best question, then do your worst question, and then finish with your last strongest question, in the hope that I want the examiner to say, this student's really good, come off with good short questions, a good ABQ, and to nearly not be reading it by the time it comes to question, or the long question 3. And then when they notice the dip, that the fact it picks back up again at the end, that they might be like, no, they're back on track. Would you give any advice on that? Or
well, what I will say to you there, is that unlike subjects like English, right, where your standard of your paper and your command of English is going to go through the entire paper, in business we're very robotic, right? And what I would say to you is that that dip question, your weak question, most people are going to end up doing that last automatically. Because you'll see later on, I did the grid in the book about the minimum score you have to get, on average. Like a H1 is going to be, has to be 54 marks, the minimum you can score on average to keep the head above water. But the tendency is going to be your first 3 questions, the strong ones. And you leave the weak one to last. It shouldn't really matter, because the corrector's hands are tied to a certain degree. Because if your weak question is pretty rubbish, whether they've got a good standard of your particular paper or not, it's not going to make any difference.
Yeah.
Because the scheme is so sort of, I don't know, tight is the word, but unless the corrector has loosened up, and the term they use when you're kind of tired and you've come to the very end of the paper, unless they've loosened up greatly, and there's a good chance if the corrector doesn't pick it up, a supervisor will pick it up. But I'd say to you, look, people have tried all sorts of different things. The general, I was saying to you early on before we started recording, that the graph starts to dip. And I don't think it's that hard to get a H2 or a H3, but I think it's a serious achievement to get a H1. You're probably one of maybe 500 people nationwide who will get the H1 in a given year. Over, we'll say there were 26 counties that do it, and Dublin in a big place as well. It's they're scarce enough. But yeah, so I mean, look, I wouldn't knock it, but the reality is, if we're doing a standardized marking process, that weak question should be marked as a weak question. The writing is so bad that no one knows, no one can work out what the words are. But anyway.
Okay, so going through here now, then there's short. Okay, answer all the questions. Go through it. Okay, that's fine. That's good stuff like that.
Yeah.
Into your acronyms, quite good here, because some of these, I suppose, bends in and out. Some of them change it, and I suppose people get one wrong. I even myself, it was a couple of years ago.
What I do there is, if you want, I'll mark off. I'll quickly give you the ones that I would think that, I would mark off CCPC, right? For the simple reason that people always mix up consumer and competition in the wrong order. It's also one that is sort of topical as regards, it's 4 years, whatever this is the change was, but that's one I'd shortlist. CEO is one that I'd shortlist.
Is that an automatic? So to go back to that one, Phil, if a student has put down Consumer and Competition Protection Commission, so because it's not in the right order, a bit like the Sales of Goods and Supply of Services Act, it'll just be 0 marks for the whole thing?
Yeah, in the early level paper, you get a mark per word. Higher level paper, it's all or nothing for those questions. And look, those questions generally will be answered well. Now, I've seen, IBEC, I've seen it being called the Irish Business Enterprise Committee. I've seen Foreign Direct Investment being the Fishing Department of Ireland. People will chance them, okay? But generally, those questions are okay. The bad one a couple of years ago was CGT, Capital Gains Tax, because it's not really an acronym. It's not, sort of one that someone shortens. SWAT is an acronym, but CGT, not necessarily. But that was a weak one. EGM is a weak one because people write down emergency general meeting instead of extraordinary. GDPR, I'd be tipping for the simple reason that it's all over the news all the time. After that, I'm looking down. There's one there as well, ISME, right? The Irish Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises. That's one that wouldn't be that popular either. And I think I'll put in there designated activity companies. I might have in this year DAC. I do, yeah, that's just because of the new legislation that we kind of are examinable on, as in from now, really, I suppose, even including the reset exam in November 2020.
There's I picked up today, DAC designate. I need to get my finger right now and go through that again. So
well, I mean, if you stick to it, the circular they gave us of the 6 or 7 pages is very straightforward. But I don't think there's going to be a huge amount of company law anyway. It's not going to be. It's never really featured. Plus, it's from that part of the paper that the average student is not going to be relying on those company law changes, because it's not in the popular section. I'd be much more concerned about Unit 1 and the changes in legislation there, and someone coming along calling it the Labour Relations Commission, or talking about all these bodies that are gone off the course. Yeah. WTM,
world-class manufacturing?
Well, yeah, but I haven't seen it. It's been years and years since it was asked, you know.
Yeah.
And WRC have just changed that one there. And World Trade Organization could be asked because of Brexit. And that's kind of is one of those ones that's sort of in the news again.
Brilliant.
But those questions are fine. Just quickly there to talk to you to the A to Z of business definitions. I started using this years ago, kind of like where you'd have students who'd be looking for the quick fix. And I had worked out that you could pass the paper. You could pass the higher level paper most year if you knew all these definitions and were able to use them in the correct places across the paper. Now, different years, you mightn't get your H6. Those are all the definitions we were given. Some of us are old enough to remember 1999's transition when it became BizOrg became business. All I've done really is I've added a few of my own definitions into it there, but they literally are the core parts of the subject. So you will see them appearing as short questions and as long questions because they were flagged to us by the curriculum setters 21 years ago. Okay.
That's an excellent piece of work because again, I suppose the definitions is an area I think where students struggle in the exam to get it spot on. They're close enough, but if you're talking about that H3 moving to a H1, definitions is an area that they just need to nail down.
Absolutely. And again, I was saying to you early on before we started recording that unfortunately business is the kind of subject that you can have 90% of the stuff covered and get nailed in a couple of small little things. You know, where something that's worth 4 lines in your book all of a sudden is worth 2.5%, and you're kind of going, how did that happen? You know? Yeah. The bolded stuff there, you know, like a lot of the bolded stuff would be the core parts of a definition. Now look, quality is fine. A bit of quantity is no harm as well, you know, to kind of put that icing on the cake of definition. If you're in doubt and you have extra knowledge, use it. Because the only time that a blank bit of paper is any good to you is a driving test where you have no X's or O's on your sheet. That's the only time you win. When it comes to the exam, you need to have the ink. And you need to have someone who can write fairly fluidly as well.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. That's a really good, you know, even I'm looking at this myself now that I'm about to go into a class and I'm getting ready to pick a particular topic, just to even have that flick through something like that to make sure I have it, because sometimes you don't want the student to take out the book. Sometimes you want to show off your knowledge, and it's just a nice little thing to have to hand for teachers as well.
Well, it's also a handy filler as well when you kind of come to end of units, particularly we'll say if you've had a class in 5th year and you kind of would be coming towards, I'd imagine like you'd be coming to around Christmas time, you'd be on unit 6 and unit 7, and like it becomes very handy then because students get they get bored with the same old routine all the time of just with saying notes and discussing them and analysing them, and they like something different. And I kind of find, you know, whether you're in primary school or secondary school, to be able to kid them along to kind of, you know what I mean, to have a bit of variety, constructive variety. I think somebody had asked, one of the questions early on you put to me there before we started recording again was like along the, you know, the lines of, what do you think of the types of homework? And like, you know, because our exam is a written exam, like on one hand you're saying you don't want people who are going to be writing out reams upon reams upon reams, you know, of meaningless words out of a book. But at the same time, you kind of, maybe if you set the same task to the class and you give them 10 questions that they could be asked, we'll say on unit 1 or unit 2, unit 3 and 4, and you come in and then you pick 3 of the 10 and they go and do it then against the clock. So you're kind of helping them along because you're guiding them as to what the test will be about, but you're not making them, anyone can produce 10 or 12 pages. Something very, very clever I saw, I suppose it's use of technology. I did an online class last Friday and I gave them a Microsoft Word document of Unit 1. Then we had covered bits and pieces, so I gave them 3 or 4 questions for homework. And I got in the homework on Sunday, and in fairness to the girl, like she did the finest bit of copying and pasting ever. But I was all her layout would have been the way I'd have wanted it if I was correcting it in the Leaving Cert. Like, learning it'll be the problem. But from the point of view of, you know, if they can get used to using technology to lay stuff out, and I always kind of say that, you know, you almost like press return twice between your paragraphs to leave the space, to allow your corrector to have space. And like I haven't done the online marking yet because it didn't happen this year, but like it's very much by all accounts, you're literally dropping in the score, almost like putting a golf ball, which you know all about, Breffni, but it's almost like dropping the ball into the hole, and you obviously can't get 5 out of 4 because the pre-set up scores won't allow that to happen. But like your corrector is going to need space. So if you've got your press return twice in your head before you move on to your next paragraph, it makes it easier to mark.
Yeah.
You're taking the stress off the poor old corrector.
I like that. I just what I also love about these definitions as well, and again, I'm just putting myself in the classroom, is I can see myself taking these 7, 8, 10 pages, printing them off, laminating them, and then cutting them up and getting people to match the words with the definitions. And there's a great starter activity that I have to do nothing with. You know, you can have 2 or 3 copies and hand them out, and it's there, it's ready to go. It's so simple and so important for the students to know. So I think that's great. That's brilliant. This here I like as well. I like this a lot because I think as a teacher, one of my go-tos, if ever a class is running 20 minutes short, or maybe I have to pop out of a class.
Everyone does that, yeah.
It's like, right, guys, take out your past papers and start doing some short questions. But you've kind of split this into some of the more difficult SAQs that we've had in the past, and then try to provide some model answers.
Well, I mean, look, if you look at the exam papers, and I had mentioned early on, like that from about 2008 onwards, probably just a change in approach to exam questions. And generally when we're correcting, the short answer questions are something that the State Exams Commission like to make corrector friendly and student friendly. And there's 2 reasons behind it. Like, okay, one obviously for the correctors, but you know, when you're looking at a subject where we only fail 7%, right? 7% of the entire group will get less than a H6. Of an average year, those figures are public knowledge, right? That like by doing well in the short answer questions, by having all these questions which are fill in the blank, circle the option, true or false, etc., it boosts the student. The ones that separate the H1s and H2s are definition questions. People are not good at definition questions. I picked out the ones there from, I suppose, personal experience the last couple of years to say, in my opinion, these are the questions that people did not do well on. Something worth noting is that 4 mediocre pieces of knowledge are greater than 2 super pieces of knowledge when it comes to a marking scheme, right? And like I have seen a paper that's 100%. I have also seen a paper that only got 94%, but I would have said that the knowledge in the 94% of a different year was far superior. It's just that they fell down on a question, okay? But they were almost like someone had done research on the subject, and the examples were absolutely brilliant, but they got 94. Whereas the person who got the 100%, you know, got your perfect 10 in terms of your ice skating score, which is very hard to get. But they had the basics covered. They had a load of, and been unfair by calling it mediocre piece of knowledge, but they certainly weren't super pieces. But they had the marking scheme off to a fine art, down to colouring in evaluations, colouring in various. If you're looking for the ideal acid test ratio, it was coloured in for you. You know, I first thought it was a disgruntled teacher who had gone back to school. I was glad to see the VSTAI giving a medal to a real human of about 18 and somewhere in Cork. That had done this. And by the way, in the same class, there was someone got 99.5%.
Wow.
And you're kind of going, how does that happen? Unfortunately, in the robotic nature of correcting, if someone puts down 2 marks short, you can't just, it's a bit like maths, you can't go back and say, oh, I added in 2 there to round it up. It doesn't happen.
Yeah, oh, it's a shame. It's a shame. But we're looking now then at some of the applied business questions here. And again, most people know this year, this is an odd year. We've got Leaving Cert, which is happening in November, which is going to be based on units 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah.
And then they're called a real exam, which is going to be taking place
2021.
3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
So we kind of go through there, and I suppose this is kind of all good. You've got, I like this. I see this tried to book kind of methods for answering questions, exam tips and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, like I would always say to you like this, you know, when it comes to the applied business question, whether you're studying, we can make the comparison with English, whether you're talking about Macbeth or King Lear or Hamlet, you're going to have a certain amount of a technique for doing the question, right? So say good English teachers will be telling you that, a certain technique for doing the questions. So I would look like that in the ABQ, no matter what comes up, you're going to have some kind of a strategy. And that strategy is going to start off by looking at part A and part B and part C to get the general gist. So if we look at unit 3, 4, 5, okay, we look at the immediate concern of anyone who's watching the blog between now and November, someone mightn't be happy with, you know, they might have gone for H1 and they're resitting the exam to prove themselves right. Like, if you're looking at unit 2, 3, and 4, you're going to be geared for, in Unit 2, you're going to be geared for enterprising words and entrepreneurship are the two most likely things, and they can't really ask you much more than that. Unit 3 has to be management, skilled activities, characteristics outside bet, but they're probably too obscure. And then you're looking at Unit 4, will be the area where is going to dictate how people do. Because of the ABQ, they can't be too harsh on people either. So I mean, you're probably looking at maybe human resources management is something that's easy to ask in the ABQ. Ratios to me are too technical. Tax, insurance and finance is also a nice handy area because you can always write about a business and tax implications and insurance implications and finance implications. I was saying to you off air, if you like, that one of the busiest news stories of the summer of 2019 from our course was the methods used to reduce insurance premiums. Now, that is a very ABQable because you could get a story, a case study where somebody is going to be under pressure with insurance premiums, and the question might just say, define risk management and outline the strategies and passage used. That's only for 2020, that's for November. Like the same thing could come in 2021. It'll be bizarre because we'll be in the classroom around the time the paper is on. You know, so in a class, if you have some of your class from last year, you'd be kind of wondering how they'll be getting on, and yet you walk into class the following day, which are printed off paper. But the method part of it there, neatness is a huge factor. Like if you are putting in a heading, right, I advise you to leave a line under the heading and then put in your paragraph and leave in a line or two and call your quotation a link. The official word is a link. And those links, you cannot anymore put in ... in the middle. Can't do that. Take your quotation from the actual piece itself. And the focus on it is something called knowledge, okay? Like, I mean, you can't have a marking scheme where you get 0, 0, and 3, because you can't take a link randomly, pull it from the passage and expect to get marks. The focus has to be on knowledge. You can put down a bad piece of knowledge and score and miss out on the marks for the development and get the link that way. So you can score, you can get all formations, right? All Leeds United formations, with the exception of the 0-0-2 can't happen. You can't have nothing in a link, but you can have knowledge, nothing, link, knowledge, nothing, and a whole array of it, right?
So on the issue then, Phil, of the link, if you have an exceptionally long sentence, can you stop your link halfway through the sentence, or can you start your link halfway through a sentence and complete it, or do you have to write the entire passage, even if you only needed one ending?
I think officially you're supposed to, but like I think it's probably a really harsh marker who's going to measure the word count that way, because generally the phrase, like you might come along and say that they've got stock levels are too high was a question there with the surfing ABQ. Like the answers probably will be a phrase. Officially you're supposed to put in the full sentence, but as you say correctly, some of the sentences are quite long. All I would say to you there is err on the side and put them in a little bit too long, and don't use ... in the middle.
Yeah.
You'll probably be fine.
And full stop, and put it off, and hopefully that will go this thing. But yeah, we're positive. No, it's always one because students are conscious of time in the ABQ, and especially where there's a quote that has a lot in it, and they know that they can duplicate it in another section, and they find themselves writing it out.
And I think there's generally like the kind of a decent phrase. Like once you're not kind of relying on a word here and there in red or inverted commas, doesn't look great, but generally like you'll be fine. Most people are fine, you know, that part of it. Like the links though can be pretty specific. So for example, in Leaving Cert 2019, there was a question on management activities came up, I think it was in part B of the question. And like because the wedding planner / events company made such a mess of the wedding, there was a big focus on control. Because you had misprints on the menu, you had flowers that were stale, you had a photographer who wasn't qualified, who got borrowed from the kitchen to take the pictures for the wedding album. So literally, we were supposed to cop onto the fact that controlling was an issue, okay? And that the control part of it there would have to have been decent.
Yeah.
I think as well, don't forget in those ABQs, when the question says to you, do you agree with the statement? Almost every year, you could have said yes or no. In 2019, the answer had to be no. Because they asked you, did you agree that the person under the Sale of Goods, Supply of Services Act was doing a good job? And the answer, of course, they weren't doing a good job because, like, she didn't leave enough time to organise the wedding. The dates were wrong on the menus, and there was gifts forgotten, etc. It was all flagging you towards. So if you wrote brilliantly on planning and organising, it wouldn't have been enough. You had to write brilliantly on controlling as well. and be able to mention the kinds of control.
Very good.
Okay.
So again, back to within this, we're looking here at you give throughout the book in the ABQs quite a lot of examples and stories, and you've staggered it so it's different years will have different ABQs, kind of 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, 6, etc. I like the way you put together your answer plan for each section, and then you actually give out the ideal answer as well.
I mean, I would never say that somebody couldn't write more. Those would be ideal answers. Like, and to be honest with you, like on a given year, yes, they're H1 standard. Like, but I mean, I don't expect someone to think they're the only answers in town. You can always have those as a minimum. So if you're revising, a minimum, but you can add in lots of bits and pieces. It's almost like you drop in keywords, you make the answer even better. I probably maybe gone too close to the marking scheme at times, whereas like you're given an answer that's just perfect, as opposed to giving an answer that's overloaded, which is perfect,
yeah,
within the time allowed.
This is one that I think a lot of teachers, look, it's obviously a bigger issue with students, but from teachers who I've maybe seen or observed, if I've had a PME in my class or something like that, this is the one that catches them out, where the context of the question is built within another kind of communications element. Draft a report, write a letter explaining the following factors, because you're asking the students two things on it. And I think people spend a lot of time. I'm delighted you've tackled this one here as well within it, because the length of the question can be difficult to get right as well.
Well, I mean, like that one there, kind of, I put in deliberately from the point of view of people are probably afraid of ratios in the ABQ. Personally, I think that the whole topic in Unit 4 is highly technical, and it favours accounting students, you know, complete bias towards accounting students, because anybody in accounting will know return on investment, they'll know asset test ratio, they'll know debt equity. Not anybody in business will know it. So I deliberately put it in to kind of really frighten people and think that it might come up, even though I'd be a little bit disappointed if it does. You know, for a middle-of-the-road class, you wouldn't want to see too many ratios on a compulsory question, because a lot of middle-of-the-road people will run for the hills when they see a ratio question.
Yeah. I mean, 40 marks there, you're probably looking at about 12 for the structure of the report, and maybe...
Yeah, 12, and then, like, I mean, like, look, it can vary. It'll really depend on the standard in a real Leaving Cert situation. Like, you're looking for probably, you could be looking for maybe as high as 7, 7, and 7, or 8, 8, 8 for the core of it, like profitability, liquidity, and capital structure.
Yeah.
Terms of reference might get something as well, because it's an important one.
Yeah, brilliant. I like that. It's really good. So we go to the ABQs then, and I suppose the next thing that we kind of struck on earlier on, that's more of, that's a big part, that's the ABQ questions there, is moving into this notion of the long questions and labeling them out. Yeah,
and what I've done here, like, is because this is being an in-between year, like we've got the exam in 2020 and we've got the 2021, we'll say the COVID-adjusted exam. I've had to, we'll say, put in both and say part 1. And like, you'd be surprised at the amount of people that go into a panic every year in about April or May, because we as teachers think that our subject is the most special, but so does the other 6 or 7 subjects they're doing. And you get people saying, I didn't know I was doing 1 question in part 1 or 2 questions in part 2. And they get stressed. Now, I'd say only once or twice have I ever seen in a real Leaving Cert where somebody messed up the combinations, right? Where you might answer question 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you're under pressure because that combination can't work. I think the most common one is probably question 1, question 4, maybe question 5, and question 7 is a kind of a theme that comes up all the time. Now, that'll depend on what makeup of the paper is, but question 1 and question 4, for certain, people will go as their go-to questions, regardless of what's on question 1 and question 4. People are relying on them. Just a bit of the paper layout. In my first BSTI seminar I did in DCU about 3 years ago, and the place like was busy, and I think I probably had literally talked or shouted. I think I've got radio mics since then, and the voice carries a bit better. But about 7 or 8 people hung around at the end to ask questions. And some of them were teachers and some of them were students. Now, one of the people who hung around was a fella who I had shared a room with in boarding school about 30 years earlier. It was his daughter who came up to ask me, was it the same fella her father used to talk so fondly or not so fondly about from school? But he said to me, oh, of all the parts of the course I loved the best was the way you spoke about the layout. I'm kind of going, Jesus, I put no work into the layout whatsoever. After giving out 100 pages of a booklet, and the layout was the bit you liked. But like, I think the point they were making, trying to be complimentary, saying you wouldn't expect, like things like paper layout for your answer book, label all questions clearly. I mean, like from an examiner's point of view, you don't want to be looking at question 1A, 4B, 7C on the same page, you know, or in the reverse order, or worse again, somebody with no labels whatsoever. One part per page or pages. Again, you love to see question 1A on one page, go to question 1B, next page, question 1C, next page. You don't like someone squashing in the new question down the bottom, clogging things up for the corrector, especially with online marking where you're depending on the quality of the scan as well. Leave gaps between paragraphs is normal stuff. Get straight to the point. My own personal bugbear is when people start saying to you, the first thing I'd like to say to you about, kind of going, you just wasted 2 lines of my life there and you're getting nothing for it. And that could go on to the 5th thing I'd like to tell you. So like, again, it's probably someone who's having a tough day and they're kind of just writing for the sake of writing. No long-winded intro. Name and explain most of the time. I think we had said off air earlier, Breffni, about, you know, words like explain, outline, describe. And I was saying like that really, you can take it apart from list or state, like you're looking at explanations for all those. But I wouldn't really distinguish between outline, explain, or describe. To me, they are all pretty much the same. If you have the information, hit the examiner with it. You know, don't be measuring and saying, is that 2 lines or 3 lines? If you have it and you have the time, bang it down. Evaluation is a different story altogether. Discuss is a different story. Now, someone in one of your questions there from early on was saying, what trends have you noticed as a corrector? And I'd say to you, for as long as I can remember, evaluate came in. Actually, 12 years ago, evaluate became a thing. And the evaluation, I don't think that people have cracked the evaluation just yet. There was a while where the rumor was out, if you write down, in my opinion, you'll be grand. You won't be grand. You got to do a better job than writing down in my opinion. The first thing you got to do is put down the word evaluate in red if you have it, in block capitals, so your corrector can see it. So at least the game is on when they can see an evaluation. And then you can skip your line and you can start off with in my opinion or judgment. And my advice on it would be a 2-line evaluation. You're better off with a positive or a benefit, but the way to manage it is hold back a piece of knowledge about the evaluated topic, because the corrector can't take away marks from a piece of, you know, from a piece of knowledge. So for example, the small claims court was up in 2019, the evaluation was tough. But like if you had said, if you had got your facts in first and you kept back and said, it's a very cheap method, it only costs €25, no one can take that away because it's a positive, factual knowledge piece of evaluation.
Yeah,
you know?
I like that. I also kind of quite like your last little point there at the end, practice writing neatly against the clock. It's one of the strategies I do with my students when it comes to an end of unit exam. The joke is we've 24 minutes left of the class, and they know that because they want to leave, especially if I'm their last class of the day.
Yeah.
And that's all that they get, and it's tough whether or not you've gotten to part B or part C, and then we do that from a fairly early stage to get into that habit of it. And it is, you got to practice these questions, and then we build it up to now you've got 2 and it's 48 minutes and stuff like that. So.
Well, I mean, to use Breffni, to use the sporting analogy, and you know, we've all been the fella who was last in the laps, right? If you're doing the old stamina pre-season, we were playing football, Gaelic, hurling or whatever. And like if you're the guy huh?
I was never that man. Top
right.
of the
Anyway, we'll say pretending I might have been that man, but if you're last in the laps and you're training lazily, like when the big day for the championship comes up, you're not going to find it in your locker because you haven't put it in. So the worst thing you can do is start suddenly becoming an expert at writing against the clock on your mock exam in February or March, because it's not going to be there. Like I always say to them, look, when you come back to school in September, you have a headache if you're studying properly. If you're revising properly, putting yourself under pressure, learning, recall, doing mind maps, being active all the time. If you have a headache, you're doing it right. But remember, the choice is have your headache in September or have an awful headache in June when you kind of open the exam and don't recognize anything.
Yeah, I find this piece here quite interesting. And I mean, look, it's nothing that I suppose you don't know, but it made me, when I first saw it, begin to think about just how little there is between creeping into that H1 and being stuck at the higher end of a H3. This table here for the minimum averages that student needs. I think people quite enjoy going through this one.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, the reality is, you're hoping, if you're H1 standard, right, you're hoping that you're going to nail 80 out of 80. This coming year, 2021, Like you've got 8 questions out of 12. To a very good student, they will do all 12 questions.
Yeah.
And they will get 8 right. And they will score 80. Now, if it's a normal ABQ, and the ABQ in 2019 was probably a little bit specific because the question on providing a service under the legislation was tricky enough to get full marks. Now, that I can say to you it was tricky because it was never asked before, and no one likes those never asked before topics to come up as a compulsory question in the ABQ. If we get a normal ABQ, right, a normal unit 2, normal unit 3, 4, 5 for next year's one, like you're looking at a very, very good student will have no problem getting 72 or above. So you're hoping to bank a few extra marks in the short answer question, particularly by doing the extra ones, right? Because they'll be corrected as well. If you were to save 8 marks there, for example, in the short answer questions, and you can hit about 76 in the ABQ, which would be normal for a H1 person, it gives you scope because you need to have 4 very decent long questions. Okay. One of the questions we were asked early on, that one of the it might have been Vanessa that sent the question in, but one of the questions was, what do you think may happen for 2021 as regards how they're going to manage the extra scope for the extra questions? Now, I think that question 4, and I said to you off air early on, that like in question 1, the majority of people will do it. 90% of people will do question 1, right? Because it's nice and handy from unit 1. Question 2 is not popular. It's government stuff. It's community development. It's tough stuff. It's very specific. Question 3 is a short little unit. People like it. Some of the questions, though, can be specific. They might ask you economic and monetary union there, and you write about the European Union, and you get nothing for that. But like, I think that the only benefit to students is going to be if our extra question has something from unit 1 in it, because we are going to gravitate towards doing that question anyway. There's no point giving us an extra question if it's going to be about a topic that no one does, like unit 6. When I say no one does, I mean no one does in the exam. I know everyone covers their syllabus perfectly, but in the exam itself, people won't go for it. Like if you get a question on government economic policy or something unusual, maybe unemployment, etc., that comes up as question 4, it's not going to be any benefit to us. It will be a false benefit to us by giving us extra questions.
And I think it'd be a bit abstract to be taking a lucky dip off each unit. So like a part A from a
yeah, I mean, it hasn't really happened. I mean, look, in the second part of the paper, we have unit 2, 3, 4, 5. They have mixed them up. They've never mixed up the management questions, but they've mixed up the rest of them. But like if it happens in question 4, to repeat, there's no benefit to us if it's question 4 is going to be some sort of very unpopular stuff.
So then just to go through, because I do want to get through the questions. This is the problem that I found with the book, that I was finding just so many things interesting in it. I was stopping you, asking you, why did you do this? Why did you do that? And you were very good enough to explain it to me. I like this little thing here. You leave a section for the notes as well within the book. You were saying for students, reflection time.
Reflection time, and I mean, like, people will, like, the stuff, I mean, like, look, I'd be hoping this book is going to last a couple of years. And therefore, people are going to add in bits and pieces, and they're going to use it as notes. And in fairness, we generally, as we learn, we scribble. Yeah. And you may give some extra piece of information. So the whole reflection, modern theme of senior cycle there, as Michael Gallagher would call it, right?
Yeah.
Anyway.
I think, it's spot on. I mean, it's the parts within the reflection, I think, is where students really, because if I see a student writing in class where I haven't specifically told them to write, I'd often go down and go, what are you writing? What are you doing? Usually they're messing or something like that. But I get a great pleasure in knowing that, no, you just mentioned something, sir, and I like the way you said that. So I'm after writing down, you used one earlier on, POCA for the
that's when I robbed out someone else. That was one of the boss examiners had basically said that for, when people get mixed up on management skills in their activities and this idea of what people do wrong in the exam, if you mix up your leadership, communication, motivation, the penalty is big, right? Yeah. It's a straight red for that one, because you're on 0 if you mix them up. And like planning, organizing, controlling, one of the, Con who's retired now, Con's favorite one used to be POCA, have the activities in your pocket. So you'd have planning, organizing, controlling, and activities. And that's how we remembered it. Like, and I remember it the same way. Students also write down for leadership, communication, motivation. LCM is a mathematical skill, and then in brackets they put management skill to remind them. But that's completely, you could squander a H1 or a H2 very quickly with that one.
But I love the way you've spaced within this for the students just to jot down those things. It makes it great, you know. You've got more of these exam watches as well. These are just quite little clever cues that are reminders to teachers or to students about stuff to look out for in each.
Yeah, that one there. Go back up there for a second, Breffni. Just on the subject of discrimination. Like, I know since Leaving Cert 2008, when it kind of started coming up, you know, and now the legislation has been updated. Like, you're talking about really something from our statute book, which means your definition of discrimination has got to be as it is. Yeah. And like I said to my class today, that I could bet you €100 that in the Christmas exam or October exam, if I asked them, the class, the definition of employment discrimination, what's going to happen is they're going to actually, there's no way they'll get it right. The whole class won't get it right, because I keep emphasizing you have to say a less favorable way. That's the core part. That's non-negotiable.
Yeah.
I guarantee you that when students' minds are, they write down unfavorable or not favorable, or they kind of go, did he say put that down because you have to, or did he say don't put that down? You know, but you have to kind of get it right, which is why I've written down there is needed for employment discrimination, because in class people go off on all kind of tangents and be talking about lads getting refused in nightclubs. That's the Equal Status Act. We're only concerned about the Employment Discrimination Act.
I got treated badly in one of those guys, treated bad. Ordinary level, you might get away with it, but yeah. Less favourable way, I got that highlight there. So, look, I mean, I'm very conscious of, people did send me in questions and have texted me in some stuff as well. I do want to get through them. But, you know, within that book there, I think I mean, I'm ordering it, I know that, and I'd certainly be ordering copies for my students and telling them to fork it over. For people who are going to be interested in buying that book, Phil, where are they going? Website, leavingcertbusiness.com.
Leavingcertbusiness.com. I might know that I've had leavingcertbusiness.wordpress.com, which was the free website, free to anyone. It would say from the point of view, for me, it was free. I bought the name leavingcertbusiness.com, which was surprised even available at the weekend. So you'll be redirect you, but like the plan is the book is out the first week in October. The website will be adapted to accept card payments, and it's literally direct marketing. It's myself and my own family who will be selling it from that. I hope I have a huge problem having to package off loads of books. The book will sell for €15 the price, okay? And it'll all be on the website. Again, like within social media, whatever, I'll be when I have the actual, I suppose the whole thing good enough up, good to go. I literally have my product done, but my place part of it of channel distribution is the last thing I'm doing in the planning process. So I'm hoping the next week, you know, I get a bit of help on that and get that up and running.
Well, look, when I get it up, I'll certainly put it onto my feed, onto my Twitter account, and if anybody isn't already following Phil, again, very good active account, supports a lot of the stuff he's putting on his website, and support him where you can. I think he contributes enough, and it's excellent as you can see through this. So, Phil, if you don't mind, I have gotten a few questions now. I was trying to jot them down in particular orders that could be a flow of conversations, but just through the jigs and reels of it, I haven't. So some of these are as they came into me. If you know, if you can answer it, great. If you can't, well, look, you can give a pass. But if I know you, you're going to give a stab anyway. Just there was one or two accounting questions that did come in. Now, I'm not going to put them to you for the simple reason that I don't actually teach accounting. So if somebody asks me about over trading, you know, I'm guessing as to what it is. I know it's lack of working capital and stuff like that, but it wasn't going to make sense. So maybe in another session if an accounting and economics is done. So I apologize for those people who had asked for accounting questions, but all these other ones I've gotten through. The first one I have here is, can you differentiate between doing the Leaving Cert course over 2 years versus 1 year? And they put, i.e., do you actually leave stuff out of the course? I assume what they're saying is, if you're going to do the course over 1 year, do you say, look, don't bother with units 6 and 7 because they're questions 2 and 3 and poorly answered, or do you try and do it all?
Well, I'd say to you there, like, I mean, you know, I'll give a quick example to you of, there was, when social media came in first, one of the biggest problems was people bared their soul and their secrets, right? And somebody had said, I got a H1 or an A1 last year, and we never did unit 6 and we never did unit 7. and our teacher said, don't do Unit 6 and do Unit 7. Now, maybe it's a coincidence, or maybe a paper setter was reading that as well, because the following year in the Leaving Cert, there was 5 of the 10 questions were taken from Unit 6 and Unit 7. And I kind of going, that bang goes your theory. No, I mean, like, look, ideally, if you're doing 5th year and you wanted to have a busy year, you could get through all 27 chapters a tight squeeze, right? If they weren't playing football all the time for, say, hurling, but to a tight squeeze. But like 6th year then has to be a case of learning, right? So now most people generally would do the course over a year and a half, and by Christmas they're probably going to be finished with chapters. I wouldn't encourage you to leave anything out. What I would say to you is make sure that the core stuff is covered, and the core stuff they're able to write it, okay? And you can write down and you can focus on the exam questions. Like, I mean, I'd make sure the first 5 units were covered well. Like, I personally would be a fan of Unit 7, because Unit 7 is the one on Europe, which is usually a short topic, and the questions are usually very teacher and student friendly, okay? Unit 6 is a tough one because the questions are rarely ever nice, but you need the basics for the short answer questions. And again, like, you know, you may get away with that as well. But no, from the point of view of leaving things out, I'd say definitely the first 5 units. Management, you must know extremely well. Most people do Unit 1. Enterprise is very short. Unit 4 can be tricky enough, it's long. Unit 5 is long. But no, leaving things out. I think I had it to you early on, Breffni. I said to you that in the question they asked on the procedures for going on strike, it was never on the exam paper until 2019. And all of a sudden you see a tiny piece of legislation comes up for something along the lines of 2.5%. If you would have said, you know what, I won't bother reading that stuff, that never comes up, you'd have been caught. But I think 5th year, you go through as much as you can. If you're finishing off the course in the first term in 6th year, you know, you're kind of keep the class interested as long as you can for January, February, March, April. You may lose them in May anyway. Kind of keep the classes as exam-centric as you can, because those students who go off to libraries in various places, they generally don't do as well as, you know, those students who stick with you and take the guidance from someone who knows what they're doing. If we can say that those teachers know what we're doing.
That's great. You know, that I suppose ties in nicely with the next question that came in from, look, I'll name some people and I won't name others. Colin Burke sent this one in. Do you yourself have any particular way in teaching the units? You kind of mentioned here, would you, for example, start with Unit 2, or do you always start with Unit 1? Do you change it up?
Only time I've changed it is, to me, the scary ABQ topics are Unit 5, 6 and 7, because take, for example, if I have a repeat class, and I've had some in the past, like if you've got repeats, you could have students, I'd say you're the same in your own school, where like people come and take business up in a year. On a year when it's Unit 5, 6 and 7 is the ABQ, you haven't got a hope of having been ready for mock time because you won't have covered Unit 5, 6, 7. Of that year, you might do Unit 1, 5, 6, 7, 2, 3, 4, just because it makes sense practically. But personally, I know that I'm old enough to remember when they gave us advice in in-service 20-something years ago, that like I've already forgotten most of it, like, but they were saying that Unit 1 was your introduction one to start on, and then there was different ways you could go to 5, 6, 7 or whatever. But I think really let the ABQ dictate really. You don't want to have a situation where you're struggling in the month of March or April to get students ready, where you're giving them a fake mock paper because you haven't enough stuff done to do the applied business question.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, question 3 here I have. What advice would you give to a teacher who's new to teaching business, i.e. they've never taught business before? Okay, yeah, I remember this now. So they've never actually taught business before. They've been a teacher of accounting only, and now they've been asked to teach business. Any advice you give to that teacher?
Well, I would much prefer to be asked to teach business after teaching accounting than be told you taught business all your life and they threw accounting over on top of you. Because if someone teaches all three, you can make up business, you can't make up accounting. But I think, like, look, it's a case of you're looking at the old advice that I give anybody would be like, look, in the whole business of teaching, I can cut it up into 3 things and say, in your topic, in your subject, 40% is inspiration, know what you're doing. The other 40% is the perspiration of getting stuck into all the good resources that are out there and put them into a manageable set of stuff for yourself. And be it, you know, make it look like, at least make it look like it's your own. And that way you're going to keep the students enthusiastic. And the 20%, by the way, is the bit of having the common sense when to know when to avoid the battle in class. You know when to stick and you know when to twist and kind of say, well, you know, we won't go down that road. But I think the perspiration part is the key to it, particularly for younger teachers. I think if you get stuck in your early years, put together a decent set of notes. And there was never as much resources out there. Now, saying that, don't make them too long either. I have my own set now cut to 300 pages. I've seen people with 1,000 pages. Unfortunately, no one gets past Unit 1 or Unit 2. Yeah. But I think the hard work and the preparation, and advice I was given by an English teacher years and years ago was, it's very easy to be an entertainer when you go into your class if you know what you're talking about. And if you have the work done, you know, and it's a bit like saying when you get something new, if you do new notes or new ABQs or new something, you walk in with a pep in your step. You're into a topic you're not too sure of. You certainly want a pep in your step. That's a good while.
As what I'd add to that, and I agree with everything you said there, to that person, hopefully they watch it now, is that they do try and get a good understanding of the structure as well, and understanding the state, explain, expand, or example, or whatever it is, because I think it's your go-to then. If ever you're stuck in a class, you can pull out the Leaving Cert book or their class papers and just get it. And if they're following that format, at least they're moving in the right direction. So,
but even I mean, like I've often, and see for yourself, Breffni, too, like I've often answered questions privately on Twitter to people who'd, you know, somebody sends you, you know, I wasn't sure what you meant by something, and you'd often answer, you know, a question that way. And there's even like to attend the, you know, the BSCI meetings, and don't mean to be there every time and be up the front row, but if you're there, don't be shy and don't be kind of caught up into the old herd mentality. If I can't be delaying the meeting and I can't ask a question because I look like I'm too loud or I haven't got a clue. Like, I mean, you're better off asking those questions, because the chances are, more than a classroom situation, you're saving the 10 people beside you who are have the same questions as you, but they're afraid to ask.
Yeah, actually, that's a great point. This is my own plug now here as well. If you haven't already, that person, join your local Business Study Teachers Association. Okay, I'm not quite sure what part of the country you are. We've got lots of branches everywhere. So, I think it's 15, 20 euro maybe for the cost of the resource you get are brilliant. And then reach out on Twitter as well. So, well done, Phil. You got to plug in for something that I know. Okay, next question. Let me see. We've kind of answered this, so we don't need to spend too long on it. Any advice for how to tackle the exam? Is it any difference between the short questions, ABQ, long questions? Would you do them, and like, would you follow the structure of get your short questions out of the way, then do the ABQ, and then do your long?
I mean, most people do. I mean, like, look, I think, well, I suppose to say most people, you're going to get the ABQ done after the short questions. People like to get the old stigma that's attached to the ABQ for no apparent reason to get it done early. You know, I think if you're doing your exam and you're hitting around 11:45 and a 3-hour exam that's over 12:30, is the 45-minute slog of the ABQ left last is not going to be that easy. Yeah. Like, I think get those big marks, especially for a H1 person. You need to score high in the short questions. When you're fresh, get the ABQ done, because it's a big ordeal for 80 marks. Whereas you might get a nice old question on marketing or something as, you know, your last question to do.
Yeah, not perfect. Okay, next one, I think you mentioned, or I'm going to mention again, and this one came in from Vanessa. Your thoughts on any topics maybe for 2021, and specifically the additional question? I suppose we have touched on that.
I mentioned earlier on, just like, I think this, I'm hoping that this Unit 1 will be the most beneficial to everybody. Now, whether the State Exams Commission or paper setters feel the same way, I don't think it's any benefit to us if they put additional obscure areas. And I'm calling Unit 6 an obscure area. So the nice thing to be asked will be something else in Unit 1.
Yeah, that's open nice then. Another question here. This was maybe a bit more in your role as being an examiner as well. What's maybe some of the biggest mistakes you see students make? And I actually think this came in from a student. What's some of the mistakes you see them making?
Yeah, two of the things I'd say to you, like, we'll say the most common mistake, and every year I keep on thinking this is the year where they're going to get this right, is the word evaluate. Okay, the word evaluate. I think there I was saying to you, like, I did an article in the Evening Herald a good few years back, and the heading was, "It pays to evaluate." That was the heading of the article, and I was just kind of more or less saying, we can't, like, a lot of people ignore evaluate. The minimum you've got to do is get the word down. You know what I mean? To at least have a separate section that your examiner can read it. Now, in the ABQ, we're looking at often to see, can you find the evaluation in there? But it's a nightmare trying to correct something to find an evaluation. It's much nicer to have the evaluation down the bottom, right? And what's easier. That's one area. Everybody, I think, could brush up on the evaluation, even the people who have, you know, H1, H2 standard people, you know, to remain up at that high perch, get the evaluation sorted. And then, like, don't make daft mistakes like management skills mixed up with management activities, or enterprising words mixed up with managerial words, or God forbid, Maslow and McGregor been mixed up. And that happens regularly, okay? Where someone talks about Maslow's theory X and theory Y, which is wrong, by the way, and talking about McGregor's hierarchy of needs. And I don't know what part of the brain gets frozen. Even 1 year, again, it shows you the stress people are under. There was a question on Maslow asked, and the question was called 3 dimensions limited. A sizable number of people, right? A sizable number of people wrote 3 headings for Maslow. So obviously, week 3 of the Leaving Cert, brain fried, 3 dimensions, 3 headings. 2 of Maslow's headings disappeared, right? But in general, like, that's definitely the evaluate wins that one comfortably.
Okay. Next question here. Which of the, this is quite a good question actually, I like this one, and you'd be the best man to answer it. Which of the 3, I suppose, business subjects would you recommend, again, I can't remember if whether it's a son, a daughter, or if this is a particular student, that they would take on as an extra subject for Leaving Cert? So I suppose if they're looking at doing subject number 7 for the Leaving Cert, or 8, I nearly forget now how many they do.
Okay, well, I will say our subjects.
So out of our subjects, so between, do they take on business, do they take on economics, or do they take on accounting? Now, my assumption would, yeah, sorry, I'll just go with that one now. I won't read too much more into that.
Okay. I would say to you, if you're looking at, and we've kind of mentioned the business a lot, but say if you're looking at accounting briefly, if you've got somebody who wants to be able to manage a subject, now the key thing here is they need a teacher, okay? You will not do accounting on your own. If they mean extra subject, do they mean something that they're going to do on their own? Okay, well, definitely accounting I wouldn't do on my own for a start. But as an extra subject, if somebody is into logic and someone's into hard work and into managing their revision, you can manage the accounting course very, very easily. As in, question 1, 30%, we have a general idea where the questions come from. Question 5, 25%, up 40 years in a row. We've been guaranteed it's going to come in 2021. They told us that, right? So we're now on 55% of, we'll call it game management, right? Costing, question 8, okay, flexible budgeting comes there too. You can throw them together, you've now got 20% more, okay? And the 20% more part there on it takes you to 75%, which you probably could cover in a half of a 5th year or a half of a Leaving Cert year. Your problem with accounting comes from what comes up last. And that's where you kind of have to go down the pecking order. I said to you off air early on that, like, if you've got 5 more topics that could come up, I've never gone below the 5th one, okay? But I would be sweating on the 5th one if I turned the paper and there wasn't at least something from it. But accounting to a person who is very numerous, good at arithmetic, not necessarily good at maths, and nice and neat and lays things out, and a logical kind of person, accounting is an easy one to get H2, H3. H1 is always tough to get, okay? And that person mightn't be good at learning things off by heart, which is no harm. Business, I would say to you, learning things off by heart, but you need an ability to get it down neatly on paper. You got to be pretty much a fluid writer who is able to, what I was saying to you off air, that like Ian Dempsey did a thing on JFM the other morning called Waffle, and literally they gave you a topic, and if you got the 5 keywords in the topic, you got the prize. Not sure that you even get the prize, but like businesses like that, if you were able to fluidly write the keywords, a combination of quality mixed with a bit of quantity, and your ability to write, and you learn it off by heart, it's business for you, right? You don't have to like figures, you can still get through the business paper. Economics is much more for someone who likes to debate, someone who is into politics, someone who's into current affairs and is worldly aware of what's going on around them in general, a bit streetwise. Problem we have is economics is in our first year of 2021. We've no real idea what the paper, I haven't seen the sample paper yet, but the old course, the reason people went for it was because it was 8 questions, do 4. We have a restricted choice now, I think it's something like 4 or 6, allowing for the COVID changes. I could be corrected than that. But I think that you, again, have to have a mixture of numeracy and good ability to write. and be able to draw graphs and diagrams. These people hate those altogether. However, economics, you know, you can have a random question. I mentioned to you early on, 1 year I covered 13 extra current affairs topics towards the end of the year, thinking I was a great fella. And they asked a question on bloody floods, right? And I had not covered floods, even though the question generally is going to be on infrastructural damage, etc., and how it impacts the economy. So in order, I would say, for someone who does it on their own, business is doable, right? You need the guidance of somebody, okay? Like we do know we're talking about those business teachers. Accounting, don't do it on your own, because you can sit back and you can be 3 hours wondering where a figure came from, only to be told later there was a misprint in the Leaving Cert paper that year, and the question is because of the misprint, and you've lost 3 hours of your life. And economics depends on the student themselves. That's just my take on it. And again, like my young fella is in junior cycle, and I would be kind of guiding him. He'll do two of the three, I would say. He's that way inclined anyway. I probably would be guiding him towards accounting and business in no particular order.
Very good, very good. Yeah, like that question when it came in. I'll pull back up that person, and I'll obviously send them a link for this, but I'll also give them your 1, 2, 3 and kind of reasons why. That was great. This actually might be my one. What's your favorite topic to teach? This is a bit easier than the last question. What's your favorite topic to teach? And I also hear your least favorite topic to teach.
I would say definitely the least favorite topic is Unit 6. Okay, I don't like the categories of industry. I don't mind the government economics comes in there again, but just I find that whether it's later in the course, types of business organization doesn't rock my boat either. I'd say favorite topics to teach are probably Unit 1.
Right.
Probably because everything's fresh. I like law of contract. I like those legal questions. I like those disputes in labour law, etc. I like that area. But yeah, so Unit 1 is my favourite. Unit 6 is my least favourite. I don't mind Unit 7, because Unit 7 I find is a bit more, is easier to get, you know, a handle on than Unit 6.
Yeah, that's right.
I would say the one thing I'd say to you is that the topic that people think they like, but in the exam doesn't work in their favour, is marketing. All things marketing might look like they're easy, but the questions can be extremely specific. I get a book plug in there again. I did particular research on things like market segmentation, stuff like PR and sponsorship, and I kind of did picked out a few decent examples, because I kind of figured like they're scarce on the ground. There's a couple of marketing questions there people just do not get. They don't get it. Like, it looks easy, but like you're going down to what a niche market is, or what market segmentation is, or even the simple 4 Ps, and people tend to overrate themselves. You got to know what you're talking about. And that's actually...
Yeah, there's a bit more to marketing. People, I think it was a fun topic while you were learning it in college, and it maybe stuck out if it was an elective and stuff like that. But yeah, Leaving Cert, there's a lot more in it than teachers probably do give it credit for. I agree with you on that. Couple more, and then we're finished, Phil. I'm sorry now, because it's taking
no matter. You're okay.
What format do you give homework in? I suppose, firstly, do you give homework? And then secondly, if you do give homework, what format do you give it in? And then they were asking, i.e., is it past paper questions, or is it questions from a book?
Well, I would, a favourite phrase of mine early in the year is when we do the law of contract, and we do something called an implied term, which is implied by our actions. I tell them every day in class, an implied term of my agreement with them is that they learn something after every single class. So it's automatic learning homework. If I cover 6 pages, it's automatic learning homework. Now, unless there's a threat of a test, they mightn't take that seriously. But I've moved away from the whole idea of someone being given a massive assignment of writing. I prefer to give them maybe 6 to 7 questions. At the moment I'm in Unit 1, so I give them 6 to 7 questions and say, look, at the end of next week, I'm going to ask you 2 of the 7. Just 2, no choice. I'll pick 2 and you answer them. That way they learn and they prepare the exam work. I'd always use the exam papers, much more so than the books, just because you're going back to the same kind of questions that the examiner is going to ask. But like, I think the idea of copying down, people will copy down all sorts of stuff. You know, I kind of find that when I do my own notes, I often have, you know, not a bit of a typo or a misprint somewhere along the way, and you get it back in the homework and kind of go, right. So no, go away from the laborious writing without thoughtless writing and move towards being able to do the stuff unaided, blank page, get the points down against the clock.
I like that idea that your homework is geared around maybe that end of class test or any unit test where here's the potential 7 questions. You have a week to get these ready, and then any random 2. I
Well, you've no excuse. Like somebody who doesn't get the 2 out of 7 questions, when you flag the questions, and the chances are you'll pick the 7 most important questions anyway, but just it's to bring in a certain amount of revision all the time.
Yeah, and for me, it kills that student, and we all have them. Sir, what extra questions can I do? Because I really want to get a H1 to get into whatever course it is. You're kind of saying, look, if you know those 7.
That's a September disease, though. You have those in September and October that fall by the wayside in November. But every other subject has been thrown at them.
Okay, 2 more, and then we're done, because one just came in on my phone there a few moments ago. Let me see. No, well, actually, this question here we've answered. It was saying, have you ever left out an entire unit to focus on other areas? Your answer to that was no. Try and get everything covered, because you probably need them even for the short questions.
I was going to say to you early on, Breffni, that like the problem is you can have 90% of the course covered, and you leave out little bits and pieces. You know, I always call it the stuff that you nearly learned. Stuff that you go into the exam and you've got absolutely no clue of. When it comes up, it's no surprise. It's only the small little diagram in the corner of the page that you almost looked at the week before that gets you, you know? And I had told you a story off air early on, and I'll give you a quick version of it, of a guy in accounting who had covered everything brilliantly. And the general gist was, in his real Leaving Cert, he scored full marks in question 1, 120 out of 120. Question 6, 100 out of 100. Question 7, 100 out of 100. Question 9, where I'd say he was given bad advice, or he just went off on a tangent himself. He thought there was only one topic that would come up. He scored 11 out of 80 because his one topic didn't come up, and he kind of made up bits and pieces and scored 11 out of 80. So that guy scored something like 570 or 580 points in his Leaving Cert back before the old bonus for maths and stuff like that, real points. And he had, it just shows you can be as perfect as that and get caught in the hop. And that's something I would tell them every year. And it was 09 that happened in, and it was someone I had been asked to do a favour for. Will you talk to him? I couldn't tell him how badly covered for question 9 he was, because I would have upset him for the exam. But he told me he couldn't have got above 84%. He was right. He got 84. He got 84 and a quarter. He was close to being right. So don't leave out stuff. Not worth it.
I guess if one thing, COVID and this notion of online teaching has showed us that if a teacher is struggling to get a unit covered, at the very, very least, move toward a bit of blended learning, or a bit of giving the resources through your VLE, whatever it is you use, and then be prepared for questions or something like that. But okay, the last question came in. I know the person from the BSTAI, and she asked, any suggestions for how to best prepare for the 2021 question? For 2021. How to best prepare. I presume it's maybe a bit like the last question that we had, which was how to best prepare for the additional questions that are going to be asked in the short.
Yeah, like look, we're to a certain degree we're stabbing in the dark on it, because there's no guidelines as regards what the paper setter is thinking. I just hope that the extra questions are going to be in topics the students are going to answer, right? Like question 1 or question 4, something along those lines is a benefit to you. Giving you an extra question on unit 6, which is question 2, or something like it, is not necessarily a benefit, okay? But like I would say along those lines, I think that the very fact we're getting extra questions, considering students fall down on their 4th choice, like you've got a bigger choice now, bigger short answer question choice. ABQ won't change much, but I think that you have a better chance of getting 4 decent 60 markers.
Yeah, I think so.
Be less casualties at the final fence on the final question.
Yeah. Listen,
no?
Philip, thanks so much for coming on, for passing on your knowledge. Again, Philip's book is going to be out pretty soon, if it's not already ready to go. It's called The Higher Option. You can order it through leavingcertbusiness.com.
www.leavingcertbusiness.com, and I will be adding the old pay feature on that. The book will be €15 and good value at that. And you can provide it online. It's direct marketing. I'm publishing it myself. I'm not doing it by a company, etc. This is my own bit of entrepreneurial activity, and it's a stab in the dark. So I hope I'm going to at least break even.
Anybody who's watched this and has clicked through we only scan maybe 20 pages of the book. Look, it's all good. I would recommend, as I said, I'm going to be buying it. Go out and get your copy. Phil, thanks very much, and I'll speak to you at an event soon, please God.
Okay.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks a million.